Go. Now we are learning the 10th letter in Iggeres Hakodesh. And as we often say, before I speak, I'd like to share a few words. So I'm going to put this up on the screen. I hope everyone can see this. Is it clear with different colors? I'm pretty proud of myself. So we're going to be working off of a primary word. You know that in Hebrew, every word has a shoresh, a root word. And then we add suffixes and prefixes to make basically compound words. So the primary word we're going to be talking about is this word here, tum, tough mem. Tum translates as everything from completed, finished, expired, and so on. Now, in Hebrew, we add a suffix or a prefix to modify whom this word, and in this case, it's kind of like an adverb. It describes an action, who it affects. So one of the ways we do it is we take the word for the pronoun and then we combine it to the primary word. So we have a pronoun here, hopefully recognize, anachnu. Anachnu is a basic pronoun, translates as we, a group of people. If we want to make an action reflect a group of people, that is, add a verb or an adverb to a group, we say the noun or the verb, tam, and then we add the last two letters, the nun and the vav. So samnu is a word. Samnu means we don't, because in the pasuk it's low, which we'll talk about, expire. So samnu would mean we expire, but the pasuk, the previous word says low, we do not. So the pasuk reads, it's a pasuk in Eicha, which was written by Yirmiyahu Hanavi, Jeremiah the prophet, at the end of the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, where Jeremiah's prophecy was very sad. His primary life's mission was to tell the people that if they don't change their ways, Hashem is going to destroy the first Beis Hamikdash. And they didn't believe him, and they jailed him, and they accused him of blasphemy. How could you even suggest such a thing? And unfortunately, like the hypochondriac who finally dies and says, see, I told you I was sick, Yirmiyahu is, quote, vindicated when Hashem destroys the first Beis Hamikdash. So Eicha, which you recognize, we read it on Tisha B'Av, it's one of the 5 Megillas, it ends with this pasuk, Chazdei Hashem, by the kindnesses, plural, which we'll talk about. See the yud suffix here, chesed, kind, Chazdei, kindnesses of, okay, of Hashem, ki, that, lo, they do not, samnu. Now, samnu is going to become the crucial entry into this discussion. So if you look it up on any translation, it translates it as the kindnesses of Hashem never cease. That Hashem's kindnesses never cease. However, as hopefully you can already anticipate, as we have pointed out, tam plus nu isn't that the kindnesses don't expire, but that we don't expire due to the kindnesses of Hashem. Now that's a twist of a phrase which the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce. Now, in contrast, I couldn't fit it on one page. You may recognize every day in the davening, if you want to look it up, it's in all 3 of the davenings. It's the Modim section of the Amida, page 51. It concludes with the phrase Chazdei Hashem. Here, I'm down here. Kiloi samu. See, there's no nun there. Chazdei Hashem, kiloi samu. The kindnesses of Hashem never expire. All right, the tamu, it or they, does not expire. That's this. Chazdei Hashem kiloi samu. So we're going to work off the difference between this word kisamu and this word kisamnu with the vav that I put in the blue. So hopefully everybody sees this on the screen, and hopefully this becomes, we could reference it back again later. But again, the Alter Rebbe is going to be working off. This is a pasuk in Tanakh and Eicha, and this is from the davening, and there's similar yet clearly different. Samnu, samu. We don't expire, they don't expire. There is no non-human plural pronoun. I mean, there's no plural for the word it in Hebrew. It could be one thing, it could be many things. So when we say they could be many people, it could also be many pencils. So again, whenever you try to translate it, so you're going to run into these little glitches here. So there is no plural pronoun for items in English. It's. We don't have a plural for it. We say they. Though they are blue pencils, whatever it is. I don't know. I can't think of a good example, but I think everyone understands the point. So again, this is the pasuk in Eicha, Chazdei Hashem. The kindness is plural. We're going to talk about that as well. Never cease, or as we're going to read it as, we don't cease because of the kindnesses of Hashem. Ki lo samnu, because of Hashem's kindnesses, we don't expire. In contrast to the kindnesses of Hashem not expiring, as mentioned in the davening, ki lo samu, no letter nun. That's the crucial difference, and this can be found in the davening. It's in all in each of the Amidas. It's the Modim. If you happen to have a sitter handy, it's page 51 in the Shachris davening, and then different from Mincha Ma'ariv. It's the end of that paragraph that begins with Modim. Kiloi Samu, Chazdei Hashem Kiloi Samu. Okay, hopefully everybody sees this. Hopefully you remember it. If we can always go back to it, I'll keep it over here. But meanwhile, we will soldier on. Okay, so here we go. The Alter Rebbe in this letter was written in 1784, and it was an appeal for tzedakah for Jews who lived in Russia, in these little tiny villages and hamlets and so forth, and they were basically held captive by onerous landlords who repossessed their farms. I mean, they were literally at the whim of these cruel landlords who would just, expel them, repossess their farms, and so on. So the Alter Rebbe is reaching out to people. So he begins with Achrei Drishas Shalom. That's that adjective if you have the original print, if it's not spelled out. After inquiring for your well-being, and again, this is not just it's like people leave a phone message when we used to leave phone messages. Hi, how are you? It's just a phone message. Why are you asking me a question? Hi, how are you? There's that joke. The fool is the person who asks how you're doing, and the fool answers. Hi, how you doing is just meant to be a dismissive, but it's not in this context. As we see, not every letter begins that way. And the Alter Rebbe is acknowledging that he's reaching out to people who themselves are stretched. This isn't what we call people with a lot of discretionary income. I begin with words that I hope will rouse your ears to hear, and a kind of reproof. Asher hoichiach Hashem chayim, that God, who is the source of life, is sort of reprimanding or reproving or and so on. Through a prophet. Now, the fact, why does Alter Rebbe have to say it's through a prophet? He's about to quote a pasuk. This pasuk is in the book of Eicha. It's a not only is it there in Tanakh, but it's one that we read. We read Eicha on Tisha B'Av, and we're familiar with this pasuk that it was related to us by a Navi, Yirmiyahu, a Navi. So why does the Alter Rebbe find it necessary to sort of underscore this? And so we explain that he's emphasizing that it comes from a Navi because it has the stature of Nevuah, of prophecy, namely that it can be relied upon to be eternal. So when the Alter Rebbe quotes that this comes from a prophet, he is reassuring us of its absolute certainty. V'amrin says, Chazdei Hashem, the kindnesses, and it's plural there, as we pointed out in that little chart, and it's important. Kiloi samnu, for we do not expire. So the Alter Rebbe begins, and this is a standard way. We've seen this many times before in Tanya, and you see it all over parts of Torah analysis, that we begin with this sort of angle that we start. I use the analogy. I mean, it's you run your finger over it until something catches. There's something here that you could easily just dismiss. And again, almost every translation, or I should probably say every translation, reads this as the kindnesses of Hashem don't expire. However, as the Alter Rebbe points out, if in fact that's what it meant, that the non-expiration was a reflection on or a modifier of the kindnesses of Hashem, it would say, as we say in the davening, so it clearly has other forms that validate that that is a proper usage of the term. We say, Chazdei Hashem kiloi samu. Samnu is something very different. So it's like our finger caught on that. Hey, wait, there's something going on here. So the Alter Rebbe begins, and again, this is that Talmudic style of analysis. It seemingly should have said kiloi samu, that they, it's, the plural pronoun, do not expire. And how do you know that that is in fact a legitimate usage? Meaning, how can you validate that as being a proper grammatical sentence? So I give you an example. It's say we say it in the davening, commercial custom, like it says, Kiloi samu chasadecha. Like it says, your kindnesses do not expire. And again, as it said in the davening. We're great. Okay, so now we got a question. Now we have an entryway into an idea. We have two verses. One's not really a pasuk; it's a quote from the davening. But we have two terms: kiloi samnu and kiloi samu. Now, we are going to address these. We're also going to be addressing what does Torah mean and in the davening mean when it says chazdei, the kindnesses, plural. What is the difference between a kindness and the kindnesses of Hashem? So here we go. So we can start to understand this based on a statement in the Zohar. The Zohar says, "Is chesed v'is chesed, is chesed olam chulu v'is chesed ilah to rav chesed chulu." So now, much like we saw in the earlier parts of the book of the Intermediate Man, Sefer Shal Beinanim, that one of the things that Chassidus offers us is a way to measure and describe and capture what is essentially immeasurable and uncapturable, such as love and fear, and not just to speak of them in some generic detached term, rather to speak of them very specifically and to really start to break them down into somewhat of bite-sized pieces, while always being cognizant that you can't really break them down into somewhat of bite-sized pieces. There's always going to be an overlap. And we talked about terms like the love that's born of the world, the love that is abundant, the love that is absolute alignment, tainug. We talk about entry level of yira, reverence, fear of punishment, fear of separation, awe, sense of distance, and so on. And again, we'd like to put them into nice, neat little perfect packages, but it doesn't work out that way. Concurrently, there is going to be a shade. It's like colors. Not all colors that fall under the term of blue are identical. And then we start to try to come up with terms and even numbers, and shades and so on. And it doesn't just, they don't have that stark a difference, that spectrum from white to black goes across the whole process, and they sort of lead into each other. But at the same time, we say there is a difference between red and green. So the same thing here when we're going to talk about these ideas. Now, the sequence of the perek is going to speak about the chesed as being a sort of intuitive level of godliness. And remember, chesed, although we translate it as kindness, should really be translated as limitless, non-giving. Remember, in the pasuk in Divrei Hayomim in Chronicles, that maps out what we know as the seven spheros. The first one is called Gedula, Hashem HaGedula. You recognize it. We say it every day in the davening, Baruch David. We say it when we take out the Torah, Hashem HaGedula, HaGevura, etc. Gedula, if you put that into Google Translate, comes out to mean something like big or large or something like that. It doesn't have a moral characteristic like the word kindness does in Hebrew. So chesed, in fact, even in Torah, the term chesed is used in one example, almost opposite way, as a person of no moral character, no restraint, total licentiousness, and so on. So chesed is better translated as limitless. because remember, the spheroids are not innately moral or ethical. They are like tools, just like a hammer is not moral or ethical. It depends what you do with it. So too, chesed is not innately moral or ethical. It depends what you do with it. So these are ideas that we're familiar with. We've talked about them, and how the spheroids, like I use the analogy with the colors, can intermingle with one another. And chesed needs to have gevura, because chesed without gevura is like, God forbid, a flood. A flood is water. We daven for rain, but if it's not rain in its time, we have a mess. We want to give the kid a lollipop. You give him limitless lollipops, you have a mess. So how the gevura overlays on the chesed, and that the resultant product of this is what we know is the precision demand of mitzvahs, so that matzahs have to be baked in a certain time period, and the letters of each mezuzah has to be absolutely precise. So that's more of a gevura quality. It's not really a chesed quality, because in chesed, sure, whatever you want, and so on. So the gevura, it becomes a mechanism for expression of chesed in a healthy combination. And this is going to play into this idea of the varying levels of chesed. And sometimes we just need total raw chesed. Okay, so here we go. Know ye this? HaTorah nikras oz. Torah is called Oz. You may recognize it. Oz means strength. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. It's in 29:11, where we say, Hashem Oz lo ama yitain. Hashem has gifted Oz, strength, to his people. Why is Torah called strong, Oz? Why is it called strength? Because it's very rigidly demanding. As we talked about, the matzahs and the mezuzahs and so on, they have to be exact. There's a certain rigidity. And that's one of the reasons why the Targum translation is for Gevura. It is strong. Torah is strength. Not only that it gives us the strength, which it does that as well, resilience and so forth. What's going to give us the strength to not blow with the wind? But it's Torah. But isn't Torah all accepting and all loving? And so on. And we talk about how, yes, we're all accepting and all loving of people, but not of all behaviors. We hope to rid the world of sin, not sinners, and so on. But Torah is demanding and it's particular. Ukumash Amru Chazal, or another example, is the statement in the Talmud that says, Taryag mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs. Nemla Moshe Sinai were given to Moshe from Sinai, Mipi Hagvura, from the strong one, the Almighty. Why are we referring to Hashem as Almighty? Why don't we refer to Hashem as all loving and all kindness? Hashem is, of course, all of those. Because the mitzvahs are 613, not 600 and some. It's real precise. Every mitzvah has got real precision, the lulav, the esrog, and so on. Even when we talk about mitzvahs that don't involve items like loving Hashem and fearing Hashem, also have parameters to them. They're not just some ambiguous, amorphous idea. There's real precise demand imposed on the terms love Hashem and fear Hashem, and so on. So Torah is about gevura, the strength. Now, this seems a little odd. We're just talking about this pasuk from Yirmiyah that says Chazdei Hashem, the kindnesses of Hashem, and so on. So what is the combination between chesed and gevura? But again, back to the colors, how one feeds into the other. And here we bring a source to support this idea. Kedichsiv, like it says, this is in Dvarim, towards the end of Torah, Parak 33, verse 2, pasuk 2. It says, Mi yamina, my right hand, Eish das lamai, a fiery das, they translate it as religion. Dati is the modern Hebrew word for someone who is religious. So, however, we're going to translate that. But again, it is referred to as Eish, as fire, and fire is associated with gevura. So we have many verses that suggest that the world is built on chesed, that Hashem created the world because he is chesed. And yet here we're talking about gevura, gevura, gevura. So which one is it? Is it chesed or is it gevura? Perish, so we now explain. Torah is rooted and sourced in the chesed of Hashem. Because chesed, remember, at its most elemental level, is the expression of self. Chesed is a limitless giving. Gevura is a restraining. Now, you can't restrain unless you've given. I mean, there's no concept of restraint with Hashem because there's nothing to restrain himself from. Which is called the right hand. So now, if we go back one line to that pasuk from Devarim that said, "Miyaminoi," from his right hand. Oh, right hand is chesed. That's our rule of thumb. Our strongest hand, right? Most people are right-handed. Our strongest hand is to do chesed, and then that pasuk continues, "Ejdas," a fiery, that is gevura type faith. Lama, he gives to his people. So the right hand, which we associate with chesed, is now described as presenting gevura eish. Dahainu, this means hamshachas bechinas elokusa yisbarach va'ara or ein seif baruchu el ha'olamais el yein v'tachteinim ayidei ha'adam hamamshich ha'ora al atzmai b'kiyem mitzvahs reish mem ches kiyem reish mem ches mitzvahs asay shein reish mem ches abarim demalka. So now we explain. We say that the expression of Elokus and the radiance from the infinite light, blessed be he, we'll come back to those two terms, Elokus and infinite light, to all worlds. Remember, worlds meaning stages of awareness of Hashem. These aren't locales, they're stages of awareness. Even if it's, remember, Atzilus, that level that is most absolutely consumed with the awareness of Hashem, and the Tachtoinim, that is the least naturally aligned levels of awareness with Hashem, which is basically our world, where we are primarily consumed with ourselves. Al Yedei Ha'adam is effectuated through the person. We draw it out. Hamamshich, who draws down Ha'or, the light, Al Atzmai, to himself. What is our access point for calibrating the godliness that is brought to us? Through the fulfillment of the 248 obligations, the dues, the thou shalts, which are aligned with the 248 limbs of the king. Hopefully you recognize this analogy. We've had it much earlier in Tanya, that just like a person is a composite of his parts, so too each mitzvah is a composite of the body, so to speak, again, borrowing that term, of Hashem. And every time we do a mitzvah, we become aligned with Hashem. This just is really a parenthetical here. What about the mitzvahs I'm not able to do, either because they don't apply to me, it's for a Kohen or the Kohen Gadol or the king, or they don't apply in my circumstance. I'm not a farmer, so I don't have tithings or arla or whatever it is. So we say that when we study them in Torah, and then when we join together as a body politic, as a community, so then we each are fulfilling it, because we have to have a government, so we have the king, but the king can only really be the king because of the people. So therefore, when the king fulfills the mitzvahs, it's like we're all fulfilling the mitzvahs of the king because we established that in the Kohen Gadol, etc. Now, two terms here that on the surface really seem to be different, if not almost a little bit like a contradiction. We're talking about that it is the human being through the mitzvah fulfillment who calibrates the godliness that is brought into the world. Okay, this is our idea, that we draw out the kindness. We're going to use the contrast coming up that you're all familiar with, that when Hashem expressed himself at Mount Sinai, it was overwhelming for us, and our godliness was overrun to the point that we said, no, don't do this anymore, funnel it through Moshe. So although there may be a certain degree of frustration, why isn't there more expression of godliness? Why isn't there more and more and more? Hashem's sort of response is, well, that's up to you. If you will draw out more godliness through more mitzvahs, I will express more godliness. This is our common theme. The more we draw out the godliness, the more godliness comes. It's not sort of Hashem saying, like, what do you want from me? I'm ready to do it. You need to be drawing it out more. And in that way, I will be more expressive. So we use two words. We use the word elokus, and we use the phrase, or Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Now, again, both of these are generally references to God and godliness and expression of God. Concurrently, they encapsulate this combination of Chesed and Gevurah. Elokus, Elokim, that all those different terms of Hashem, Kel, the names of the angels, Raphael, Gavriel, Michael, are all representative of godliness in precision. God creates the world with Kel, Bereshis bara Elokim. So Elokim creates the world. Kel is the mechanism of creation. So whenever we see that phrase of Elokim, it's always about real precise behavior. Sometimes it's even associated with a little bit of harshness, like do it even if you don't want to. And then we have Or Ein Sof, the light that is without end, which is much more of a chesed style. Elokim created the world. There was one day, there was 2 days, a lot of rigid orderliness. Or Ein Sof, a light without end, is a lot more transcendent. It's more what we associate with chesed than what we associate with gevurah. Hope everyone's following this here. So this is the ultimate objective here, that we, human beings, through our execution of very rigid, gevurah-oriented behaviors, matzah, mezuzah, like we talked about, evoke this infinite characteristic of Hashem. Rigid behavior, infinite consequence. Limited, unlimited. Again, chesed and gevurah blending, working together, etc. They all flow one into the other. Okay. Perish, and we now go on to explain. Remach kelim v'levushim laha'ara or laha'ara miorin seif baruch hu amalubish behem umeor zeh yumshach lo dechilu v'rechivu b'chol mitzvah kaneda. These 248, which is a reference to the obligatory mitzvahs, are described as kelim. They're individual utensils, vessels, vehicles of expression, particularisms. And sometimes, not us, of course, but we could get very frustrated with why is it so demanding? It's to have to be exactly this way. It's good enough. Leave it. It's fine. It's good. But it has to be real precise, not just because we happen to be sticklers and so on. But as we all know, I mean, computers is just a perfect illustration. If you don't put in the one dot, you don't put in the one thing, you got sodas. It doesn't work. And it's so frustrating. Why can't this thing just work? It knows what I want. And again, the people on the other side are like, well, we're trying to anticipate every mistake you're going to make and correct it, spell check and so on. But then it spell checks and it comes out, something you don't want, whatever. We all understand the idea. So the 248 obligation mitzvahs are 248 particular specified mechanisms of expression of the infinity of Hashem. Now, when those are effectuated properly, they evoke also the love and fear. So here's the irony. When we engage in these very rigid and precise mitzvah actions, we evoke love and reverence, which are they're different than rigidity and precision. Now, I don't know anything about music. Maybe people here play music, but when you play the piano, you have to do those particular keys and strokes and pedals. I don't play music, so I don't know. And then you get something far greater than just reading it off the page. That is, you read the music off the page, and it is exact, and it's not kind of, sort of, maybe. It's real precise, like it's like math, much more than it is like art. And yet it's through the math that you create the art, through the finite that you express the infinite. And that's what's going on, or similar to what's going on in mitzvah circumstance. Rak, however, Shamshach is in Slav Shetkil b'midas gvurasa shel Hakodesh Baruch Hu, hamechuna b'shem eish, shehi b'chinas tzimtzum ha'or v'achayis hanamshechas b'rin seif Baruch Hu. What happens? First, this infinity of Hashem must be expressed in absolute strict rigidity. It's got to really be blended into the precision of the behaviors. And again, that's somewhat the frustrating part. And I've seen this happen. Maybe we've all experienced it at some level. There's a certain frustration, like, when am I going to get to the good part? And you're making me do all of this rigidity. I'd like to have something a little more infinite, a little more God feeling than stand up, sit down, and so on. And it feels like there's a rigidity. And this is really the point, that we should never think that anything is just random and it's just a busy work. And then one day when you finish that, I'll get it. Now, again, this is true, lahavdil, in all forms of study, meaning the kid is taking elementary math or even high school math. It's like, what? Why do I have to know trigonometry and calculus and sine and cosine? Okay, then when he'll go to engineering school and he'll want to build the Hubble telescope, he'll say, oh, now I understand the purpose of calculus. But unfortunately, we tend to drop out long before that. So we just say, I don't know. I don't know what the value of it was, or poetry, or history, or chemistry, and so on, unless you're going to go and pursue it. So you're building up this critical mass of basic information, and you're sort of taking their word for it that it's important or valuable, or because school demands that you do it. And it's hard to recognize, like, what is the point of all of this? And then, boom, there's a point. So this a little bit, sometimes the same thing can happen. We get a little frustrated with the rigidity of the mitzvah actions, and we don't have this, kind of miraculous awareness, but that comes with time. Okay. Like most things, it's a compounded process. In order that it be invested in the mitzvah behavior, because that's our access point. I don't know what infinite is, but I know the difference between one letter and another letter, and the rigidity of the rules for making matzah and so on. That I know. I know the difference between 18 minutes and 19 minutes. But infinite, I may not know. Sharub Kukulan, at the abundance of mitzvahs, not all of them, as we'll talk about, but there's an abundance of mitzvahs, hein bedvarim chumriyim, are dealing with very material items. And the Alter Rebbe here uses that harsher phrase of chumriyim, which really translates as like rigid, in contrast to the softer term of gashmias, which we use. Remember, the gashmias comes from the word for rain, and chumrius comes from the word for rigid, strict, and also the donkey is more like stubborn as a mule. And that's what most mitzvahs deal with. Look, most of our day is filled with not evidently holy things. This, that, going to work, paying the bills, running around. So when do I get to do all that godly good stuff? Those are the opportunities, davening, Shabbos, and so on. Kitzitzis, v'tfillin, v'karbonos, v'tzedakah. With things like, physical tzitzis, they got to be made from wool. Tefillah's got to be made from leather. The karbonos are animals. Tzedakah is money. Now, even them, we have some mitzvahs, like we say in the davening, there's the mission that says, Elu dvarim she'ein lehem shir, the following matters have no limit. Kindness and so on. So there are certain things that are unlimited, but even them have to be manifest through a limited thing. Don't love me so much, just take out the garbage. I love you, I love you, I love you. There's got to be some action there. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says here. Even mitzvahs, which are about the spiritual side of the person, like fear of Hashem, and love of Hashem, nevertheless, even these mitzvahs, they still are limited. Even love of Hashem is a limited thing. And again, as we know, just like in an interpersonal sense, love can be smothering. Love can be unhealthy. And rigidity and reverence can be wonderful, beautiful. Yira es Hashem Elokecha tiri, you should fear Hashem, absolutely, one of the mitzvahs, but it could also be gruff and aggressive and repressive and so forth. So they also have to have a shear. Even in unlimited love it's love. It's not reverence. Dark green is still dark green. It's not whatever the next color on the spectrum is. As they start to lead, there is still a fine line where we say, okay, this is a different color. They are not ein soif. They are not without end. They do have a parameter about them. Ki aber rabba lashem b'li ketzu gvul umida ein adam yachol l'sayv b'libay. To say, well, I have limitless love for Hashem, endless love, it almost becomes meaningless, because there's no way that the person can contain this. And if they can't contain it, then it's not really a sense of love. So they may feel like, oh, I love, but there isn't any real containment to it or any application to it. It doesn't talk about this here, but just to illustrate this idea, in a sense, this was one of the interpretations of the misdirection that led to the golden calf. You know that the word zahav, gold, is similar to the Hebrew word ahav, which is to love. So that there was a sense that, well, what will get us out of Mitzrayim, what will lead us on without Moshe, we'll just have limitless love. And, almost sounds like a comical mocking of the 1970s pedagogy where, we won't have tests and we're not going to have classrooms and everyone's just going to read and we'll just explore wherever our heart goes, and there's a beauty to that, except that it doesn't work. But it makes a lot of sense. Let's tell kids, what do you want to study? Well, I don't know, I'm 6 years old, It's like the guy who goes to the gym and the trainer says, what are your workout goals? My goal is to not work out. What do you mean? That's my goal. I don't want to do this. So if you tell me I don't have to do it, thank you. I'll get a letter that says I don't have to do it. And then if everything falls apart, I can say, well, the teacher said, the doctor said it was okay to do it or whatever it is. Okay. So we get the basic idea that everything, even concepts which are essentially a form of a spirit, have parameters. They have what's the word? Restrictions on them. It's absolutely necessary. Okay. He would not be able to stand even for a moment, and this is what we referenced earlier, and here it is. Kamaim Razal, like it says, that when Hashem gave us the Torah, Shahaisa his galus alakusi yisbarech, and God in fact revealed himself. So we have a tendency and a desire, and it's not innately a bad thing, but it's potentially misguided. We have this like, why can't I just see God? Just show me godliness. I want to see godliness. And then we see the godliness, and we can no longer retain our humanity. It's not that we didn't like it. It's not that we were punished. Caught you. It's that the souls didn't want to stay in the bodies. Like Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, who said, who wants to be down here? Here in this world, you have to deal with all kinds of nonsense. I just want to be aligned with godliness. Noah didn't want to leave the ark. In the ark, there is safety. Who wants to leave the ark? The Jews didn't want to leave the wilderness and go into Eretz Yisrael, because there they'd have to go to work. And here I can just, bask in the infinite godliness. It was too much. Their souls didn't want to stay in bodies. And we say, well, what's so bad about that? And the answer is, well, that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants this physical world, flaws and all, to be a place of godliness. That's what Hashem wants. He wants this world to be a place where godliness is welcome, not where you have to leave the world in order to connect with godliness. And again, this is a theme that's so embedded in our mindset, and it's such a basic element of Hasidus that sometimes we think, well, sure, everyone knows that, but it's not everyone knows that. I mean, just to tell you, not everybody knows that. There's a whole segment out there in the world, I'm talking about in Torah people, who say, well, wouldn't that just be grand if we could just not have to deal with this world? And we could just hide, whether we hide in the yeshivas or it's, the most extreme is not an aviu, but the idea that I'll just hide in the yeshiva is somewhat the same. Okay. When God revealed himself, even in that circumstance, God revealed himself through statements. And again, if you look at the statements themselves, they're not that shocking. I am God who took you out of Egypt. I mean, we know that. It's not that we didn't know that. Don't have other gods before me is true even for Noah.